All right, thanks everybody. I'm going to start by giving us a general overview of the project, where we are so far, and Hyeyoung will come in to talk about the progress we've made in specific analyses. Then I'll step in briefly to talk about the Canadian site. We've got data collection in Korea and Canada, and then Hyeyoung will continue on with the sort of deliverables and say expectations and things. So I'll just start though. So notice the title change, which is that we've actually decided that rather than ask the question, which matters more, it might make more sense to ask, how do these interact? How do nation, faith, age, and wisdom interact? So basically, our aim then is going to be to explore cultural determinants and universality of virtue. To what extent is this sort of culturally determined, or are there sort of universal aspects? And also, what sort of syncretism do we find among our main variables, which is to say nation, faith, age, and wisdom? And especially we're wondering whether people who are the wisest participants according to measures that we can look for, either quantitative Monte Carlo scale or what we might determine through the interviews and say a performance that they do they differ from the rest of the population in the way these variables interact for them? So project overview, we're proposing 2 studies. First study, which is happening this year, is looking at motivating oneself to virtue, as I just said, the contribution of nation, faith, age, and wisdom, but now not thought of as competing, but rather as syncretic interacting to inform this motivation. And then study 2 will actually be the same themes, but with moral exemplars, and that's going to be happening next year. So for our first study, we've got 240 people and 4 faith conditions, a Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and agnostic, in 2 countries, Canada and South Korea, among 2 age groups, emerging adults, 18 to 25, and older adults, age 60 to 80. So we're using a multiple method approach. The first thing that we're going to do is have some questionnaires, demographic information, religious faith and spirituality. We've got 2 scales for that, a centrality of religion and a daily spiritual experiences. Then we've got, say, the wisdom scale, the three-dimensional wisdom scale. Something about self-construal, the self-construal scale, if people know that. And then values. So we've got, someone has actually done a cross-cultural comparison of 15 core virtues or values. And we have the Schwartz value scale has been used internationally. We used the revised edition of that. Now, on top of just these scales, which of course would just not be that interesting, in my opinion, although probably still interesting, but not so overly interesting, we also have wisdom performance task. Now, we originally proposed a kind of tragedy of the commons simulation last year, which we were still going to do with our younger group. But for the older group, we decided to go with a resource sharing task adapted from Igor Grossman's 2010 study, which I'll go into a little bit later. And we're going to do this through 2 interview sessions. The first session, people complete the questionnaires, but then they're asked about their own personal understanding of virtue and how they might attempt to achieve virtue in their own lives. They also nominate and describe lay people and religious authorities that they consider to be wise. And some of these will be then the subject pool for study 2. So we're trying to just get them to nominate somebody. And so, typical thing that might happen is you say, think of someone you know who's wise. If you're Christian, they'll say, Pope Francis. And you'll say, okay, someone you know. And then they might say, well, there's a great, priest I know, he's out in Vancouver. Then we try and see if they can't name somebody in the Toronto area that we could actually, sort of really interview. But we still get all this information about these different people because they're actually nominated them usually for, then they have something really they want to tell us about it. So for interview 2, which is scheduled shortly, about a week or 2 after, but sometimes immediately after, so we can discuss that actually as a group if people think that's significant. They do this wisdom performance task, and then we segue that into discussion about faith conditions as implicated in social engagement. So we give them also a thought experiment. Well, first we ask, okay, this is a simulation. Any way we could improve this, do you think? That might make this a better simulation of, sort of a pursuit of virtue. And also, a thought experiment adapted from John Rawls. If you were born into a society and say that you had no idea where you would end up, what sort of society would you like that to be? And then about people they know, what sort of moral issues arise. So we try and make it more of a sort of socially and societal take on these issues. And I'll come to that in a bit more in a minute. And study 2 is going to be basically just further exploring these issues with religious authorities in each country, with agnostic lay people nominated as wise, considered agnostic authorities. And we're toying with the idea of getting people who are in some sort of institutional role as lay people, to possibly count as, say, some non-religious authority, say someone who's heading a charity or something like that, so there would be an institutional component to that. Now, in terms of the deep integration, our team includes 2 psychologists, so Hyeyoung and myself, a Jesuit Christian theologian, Gilles Mongeau, a sociologist, Monica Ardell, philosopher and political scientist, Rika Edmondson, who was here last year, and a philosopher and cognitive scientist, John Vervaeke, and a cognitive scientist, Mike Connell. And several of us have done studies in research on wisdom, intellectual virtue, moral virtues, using different methods and with different age groups. So now one of the questions that came up for organizing, I guess, coordinating all of our talks is this issue of integration. What successes we've had, what difficulties we've had. So success thing is, one thing that seems to have been most successful is video team meetings that were recorded. So what we've done is, through the University of Toronto, we can have a meeting in which everyone in Toronto can attend. Other people can, say, who are like Hyeyoung, who are off-site, can come in by video link, and then all of that is recorded, so we can go back to it. It becomes a record that we can consult, because you go back to the freewheeling discussions we've had. We've been doing that about once a month since the project began. The types of things that have come up are the precise questions in the interview protocol. So which questionnaires capture our variables, these types of issues. But also things that are much more difficult to resolve from an interdisciplinary perspective, like study sample characteristics and how are we going to find our participants. To what extent does it have to be a community sample? And also, especially the group for the atheists, we originally had this idea of atheists. Turns out atheists are very hard to find, true atheists. So we had to soften that a little. So even some of our atheists come in as quite, say, considering themselves to be quite spiritual, but not necessarily locking into, say, one particular tradition. So we also had this issue of distinguishing our 2 interviews, because some of our team members felt that it was much more too psychological. Everything was about people's experiences, and as opposed to much more societal issues. So Rika was precisely someone who said that if the Christian groups that I've dealt with, if I came and said, I'm just very concerned about how I'm dealing with my neighbor, they would have said, you should raise your sights a little. I mean, we should be tackling issues like poverty or things like that. So we tried to adapt our second interview to be able to capture some of these concerns. Now, in terms of challenges, we anticipated 3 sets of challenges to achieving a deep integration. Interdisciplinary challenges, learning each other's disciplinary languages, appreciating core conceptual concerns, addressing even the fundamental models of what it means to be a human being. And I think we've been relatively successful in meeting this challenge through the kinds of meetings. So that we have the meetings, but also ongoing discussions, issues that arise, we simply try and resolve it through email and verbal discussions. We're soon going to be circulating manuscripts that will allow people to comment on what we've got, and that we feel that's probably going to be our most successful approach to make sure everyone's voice is heard. We also have methodological challenges which have only been partially resolved. So quota versus purposive sampling still remains a thorny issue for this type of project. If you're going to get 15 Christians, let's say young Christians, or any faith, and then the question becomes, well, should they all be one group? I mean, from a quantitative methodology, it'd be much better if they were all Protestants or something. Then you can say something clear about Protestant Christians. But from an ethnographic point of view, it's much better to get as wide a variety as you can. So we're actually tending to go more towards the variety and letting them stand for the diversity of opinions that you might have about what it means to be Christian or Muslim. But some groups have more diversity than others. So this remains a bit of an issue that we're struggling with. So we also have tried to look at, we're going to try and situate this through particular disciplinary understandings in the analysis itself. So having people like Gilles Mongeau look at this from a theological lens, or John Verbeke from a more philosophical lens, we can try and get a sense of what do they see. So we're going to go over the same transcripts and simply have people tell us what, team members, what strikes them, what seems the most interesting about this, that's going to be interesting from their own perspective, and then work from there and coordinate through that. So we're really just at the beginning of this process, as you're about to see. We had pragmatic challenges, in particular analyzing data in a foreign language. There's a translation problem between languages and worldview, training and checking native language coders or interpreters. So for this, our basic stance, although really, again, as I said, we're pretty much, to foreshadow, we're just at the data collection stage. So we've got about half of our data for study one collected, and we've transcribed in Canada several of the interviews, especially the highest wisdom scorers, who we say we want to analyze in more detail. So we've got these transcripts now, but it's just a matter of figuring out, we're just at the beginning of saying, sending them to everybody and getting a sense of what we all make of this as a team. One anticipated challenge has been, I should actually go ahead to say that, but in terms of the foreign language, so Hyeyoung actually just literally a few days ago from Korea, where she was collecting all these Korean interviews, and the issue now is we can do a transcript in Korean, but translation would be a huge task and extremely time consuming. So if we were just talking, that what we might end up doing is keep the Korean as the master text and maybe just do English summaries of key points as they go along, and then allow that as a way that the group can go over and get a sense of what's in the interviews and flag certain things for full translation. So something like that is a way that we're thinking of dealing with the issue of working from a foreign language. That might also still allow a lot of the coding and analysis to be done in the Korean, because I think that would be the most interesting thing about it, rather than try and sort of force everything into English, which automatically is a certain set of conceptual categories, or at least a vocabulary that may not be shared by, say, certainly wouldn't be the original formulation of the people. So the final unanticipated challenge has been just getting everybody to attend the same meeting. Turns out that it's even if you give a month advance notice, somehow it's just hard to get everybody to sign on at the same time. So the way we've met that is just sub-meetings for specific topics, and corralling people sometimes to get their opinion about particular issues that have arisen, and then summarizing this and sending it around through sort of email exchanges to make sure that we're all aware of what discussions have taken place so far. So obstacles, well, everyone knows that the funds arrived a little later in 2015, so it was difficult for us to want to have a further subgrant from our own subgrant. All of that took a lot of sort of administrative negotiating. So this slowed down the start of our project. It did give us a lot more time, though, to think through much more carefully what exactly we were going to do for the interviews themselves. So that actually ended up being a big advantage. We pilot tested. We found we had too many questions for the time that we had allotted, and even just for the people it'd just be too exhausting for them to do all this stuff. So what we ended up doing is we removed some scales in terms of the questionnaires. Metapersonal self and locus of control were variables that seemed like they were replicated in some of the religious questions that came up. Distinction between religious and spiritual beliefs was something we had originally toyed with, but it now seems like it was found to be redundant for Korea, although I still need to check back and see exactly how that played out. But we kept it for the Canadian sample. Now, probably one of the biggest changes is the wisdom performance task. We were gearing up to do this computer simulation developed by Mike Connell and Sienna Moran. And it involves 6 rounds of playing a computer simulation game that's got a lot of data And then basically people were saying, we're talking to people who are in their 70s and 80s, that it's not obvious that that's the kind of thing that it won't do justice to what they're really going to be able to tell us about these issues if they get bogged down in just the interface with the game itself. So we started to think of, is there some way that we could replicate some of the things that seemed important about this task, but that would be much more closer to a paper and pencil, or at the very least, I should rather say, a conversational discussion of these issues. And so we went back to Igor Grossman's 2010 black gold task, which is, in essence, the task is this, is that there's a small island, and they're impoverished, but now it's been discovered that there's oil resources there, and so some people are very enthusiastic, and they want to develop those resources. But other people are worried it's going to compromise their traditional beliefs and laws, and they're going to overrun the country, so what should they do? That's the dilemma. And you have to sort of say how it's cast as though it's a newspaper article. You have to say what you're going to do. We adapted this so that we made it now 2 nations. Haiti and the Dominican Republic, they share an island. They've discovered oil. And you're the minister for one of those nations, and what are you going to do? And then what do you think the other minister might do in reaction to your action? So we're trying to get something like the dynamicism that's in the simulation, but through something that seems much more natural to us anyhow. The Korean translation also was not, we had problems when we tried to run it. Somehow it couldn't read Korean text very well. We're not exactly sure. It seems like there's a lot of technical issues behind the scenes that Mike is aware of that we're not. It seems like it should be very easy, but as it happens, it couldn't run. So we simply just used the Korean. For the Korean site, we just used the English simulation, but we explained everything. Hyeyoung can give much more details, but in essence, explain things in Korean so they had a real clear sense of what the game is all about, and they can all read English. So for the younger people, so then we can simply proceed with the English version. In many ways, at least that standardizes it. In another way, it could also be an advantage. So basically, finally, the interviews 1 and 2 differ from our original conception. Interview 2 was originally going to be simply returning to themes from interview 1 and sort of talking about those things and maybe getting a bit more detail about it. Now we had, as I mentioned earlier, tried to make a distinction between a kind of personal morality and a much more societal vision of what's involved in being a moral self, and that we could springboard off of the simulation itself. Okay, so this is for my part, and maybe what I'll do is I'll now hand it over to Hyeyoung, who will tell us a bit about some things I started on, but you can give us the rest.
Sure. Hi. So as Michel mentioned that I just arrived from Korea, so I'm still adjusting the jet lag, and last several days I wasn't able to sleep because I was still cleaning the data and analyzing data. So I'm saying this because what we have now is really preliminary data. Cross-cultural study is really, really difficult. I've done a few cross-cultural study. You need to have a measurement invariance test before you do any kind of analysis, but we aren't able to do so because of time issues. At the same time, we couldn't collect enough data to run those things. So, for example, in Canadian site, they collect more than I did. Because they're there, they're there. I'm here in the U.S., but last April, just only 1 month, I was there and tried to recruit people, which was really, really hard. But then I was only able to recruit younger population, like atheist and Christian population, and the rest we are still collecting. So the unbalanced sample size is also an issue. So this is the data analysis we have right now is only correlation in each countries, and there is no comparison we try to make at this point. So I just want to remind you that. So we established all the sites and teams, and half of the study 1 is completed. SurveyMonk was also used for the measurement aspect of it, but for elders, what we did is we either print out the SurveyMonkeys in a big papers, and we read them, read each items for them, or they look at it together, right? So there was another challenges, right, and interview is underway right now. Okay. So as I said, some correlation analysis with we looked at the quality of life, right? So we have this all the values and moralities and virtues and spiritualities, religiosity, all these measurement, how these are, and wisdom, how these are related to quality of life. Interestingly, wisdom. That part. Okay, I'll talk about the self-control part a little bit later. So anyway, so only reflective wisdom. I already talked to a few people about what wisdom is, because wisdom is a really huge, it's huge construct and difficult to define what wisdom is. At the moment, we are looking at the Monica Adler's construct. So wisdom is combination. It's multifaceted. But it's a combination of cognitive abilities, cognitive, reflective, and affective abilities. So cognitive and affective part wasn't really, correlated with the quality of life, but reflective wisdom is correlated, with the quality of life. I did a very short, very brief multiple regression analysis using the quality of life and other, variables. I remember that reflective wisdom is also predict the quality of life too. So we're gonna talk about more, more in depth how participants thought of what wisdom is and how wisdom is related to moralities and what they think, how the morality and the wisdom actually lead to the virtuous life. Okay, so anyway. And also, quality of life is also negatively related to the independent self-control in Korea, which is not really surprising, right? So, because they are very, interdependent, not independent, right? So it's somehow negatively correlated, among South Koreans. So that shows that although it's a separate, analysis, it still shows some cultural differences. The other interesting part is that wisdom is unrelated to self-control. Because in the beginning, our hypothesis was there's differences in self-control, interdependent and independent, because there's a cultural differences. But it didn't really correlate with the wisdom, entire wisdom, although it was related to quality of life among Koreans. Okay, and we had a lot of measurement related to religiosity and spirituality. We also asked participants, rate their, perception on their religiosity and spirituality as well. So it looked like there's an intercorrelation among these, scales, which is predictable, right? But there's a very interesting thing is DSES. DSES is a daily spirituality experience scale. So daily spirituality experience scale among Korean does not relate to any type of spirituality or religiosity scale. This is not also related to their rate on their spirituality and religiosity, rating. So I thought it's really, really interesting. I don't know if you have some insight for that, and maybe we can discuss after our presentation. So, but these items include a lot of spiritual experience, which is, first of all, we have a lot of students, a lot of people, young population we have are really young, between 18 to 25. They might not have reach that point where they are really thinking about themselves and deeply, engage in the spirituality. You know what I mean? So that's probably one case. Second case is in Korea, too much spirituality, too deep into spirituality is kind of I don't know, some of you know about the DSM, Shinbyung. Shinbyung is called actually one of the disease. It's a spiritual disease type of stuff. People who have this Shinbyung are more likely to be a shaman, right? So maybe there's some negative, negative connotation among Koreans. So I don't know. I'm really curious about this. So I need to do more, study on this one. But the thing I don't understand is, I don't understand this part. The thing I don't understand is that DESE, if the, DESE, what, DSES is not correlated any other spirituality or, or religious item, I understand. But it was actually negatively related. That was the very, very interesting part I really need to dig into later. Okay. And then religion variables are unassociated with the quality of life, which was very interesting, and in a way it's contradicting, because when I look at, when I see the qualitative analysis, a lot of people, especially actually Christian population, said religion, religion is their backbone of their life, and that really helped them to live a virtuous life, and etc. But in this analysis, correlation analysis, it didn't really show up. So, but we still have a lot other participants, to do to collect data. So, we'll see later. Okay. So next year you'll see more of this. Okay. The next part is so the centrality of religious scale has a few dimensions. There's a religious ideology dimensions. There's also practice, public practice, and private practice, and experience, the spiritual experience type of stuff. But anyway, those are related to the quality of life, but this is a more Canadian side. Okay. All right. Yeah, I already explained the daily spirituality part. Okay. So in Canadian side, wisdom is positively correlated with benevolence and universalism, which is especially like tolerance aspect is related, and negatively correlated with the power, which is very predictable. And cognitive and reflective and overall wisdom are positively correlated with the core value of openness. Affective wisdom is positively correlated with the reliability. This is also Canadian side, but in Korean side, there's not, no really strong, correlations, which is again interesting. Okay, so we already explained all three, religion scales and their relationship to each other. Anyway, these are the negatively correlated with the personal values of self-direction, especially action part, and stimulation and hedonism, and positively related with tradition, conformity, rule aspect of it, and humility. I know Rob and Michael is talking about the humility later, so anyway, maybe we can talk about the similarity there. So anyway, the religion scales are positively correlated with the core values of mercy, faith, and love. Again, this is a more Canadian side. Okay, so this is a Korean side. Cognitive wisdom, I don't want to bore you to death about all this, going off all of this, the bullet point, but just some important part. Cognitive wisdom positively correlated with conformity rules, which is very predictable, right? So that's very predictable, and negatively correlated with universalism concerns, and reflective wisdom is negatively correlated with tolerance. And this is really surprising to me. And I really need to dig into why this is the case. I don't understand this, so I need to dig into more about this. Okay, and cognitive wisdom is negatively correlated with moderation, and reflective wisdom is negatively correlated with the core values of courage and moderation. So somehow it is a really interesting. Although reflective wisdom is related, related to with quality of life, somehow it doesn't really relate to the values, core values. So this is interesting things, and we need to see more. Okay. And I already talked about the DSES, so I'm gonna skip that part. Effective wisdom is related to hedonism, achievement, and power and faith. Okay, and let me go over the last part. So participants' self-rated religiosity, which I talked about earlier, is negatively correlated with the core values of wisdom, modesty, self-control, independent, which I explained earlier. And other religiosity scales are not correlated with any core values. So it is only 33. When I analyzed this data, I only had a 33, participant data. So maybe that's because of the small number of, data. So, okay. So move to the next one. We did a very short, MANOVA test looking at the four different religiosity. In Korea, there's only two religiosity, like Christian and atheist. But in Canada, in Canadian side, we have a Muslim population and Christian population and Buddhist population and atheist population. So they have a full set of religions. So anyway, look at the four different religions and some of the religiosity and part, and we found that other variables. We found that self-control does not differ according to faith group. Wisdom does not differ according to faith group either. So, but this is a preliminary data. Okay, qualitative data. So among Korean, their moral exemplar were really diverse. Especially they are focusing on a lot of the moral exemplar they're talking about are parents, very close to them. So parents and some non-religious or religious, some historical figures, but most cases were very people who are closer to them. Okay. Next, the moral wise exemplars. Wise exemplars were very similar. They're also talking about their parents, how wise their parents are, especially mothers who sacrifice themselves and try to help them, raise them, and also help the father to make a very happy family, right? So those are the good. The things they mentioned, and they also talked about the religious leaders, monks, and Christian, Christian leaders as well. And a lot of these things, especially when they talk about the moral exemplar, they are talking about the caring aspect of it, pro-social behavior, and caring and empathy. They emphasize a lot, rather than justice. I mean, they some of them, of course, talking about the justice and other the human rights issues and everything, but the caring part is a huge, the core aspect of this morality, and even wisdom, wise exemplar. Okay. All right. So what's a culture and religion in their for them to live what culture and religious fact in their morality or to live a virtuous life, right? Interestingly, many Christians think that religion influence the most greatly for them to live a virtuous life. While among atheists and a few Buddhists, they really don't have it. So it's understandable in a way because Korean culture is the Buddhism is deeply rooted in our culture. People don't really distinguish if it's actually from Buddhism, the things we are doing. Our culture is actually from Buddhism, or it is just what we do, right? So there's a rare distinction between the culture and religion. Buddhism, but Christianity is a little bit different story. They just recently introduced, and the Christianity is the most fastest growing religion in Korea, and they are very fundamental. They are doing they have a study groups, Bible study groups, almost every day, and their ceremony is almost like several times a week, and etc. Right. So anyway, so that this is also very interesting to study further. Okay, simulation. When we did the simulation, some people focus on they have to, when they do the simulation, they have to set a goal, right? So either their goal is making money or sustainability, or citizens' happiness or satisfaction. Anyway, they have to choose one out of these four. Some people choose that their goal is citizens' happiness and satisfaction. However, most of the people who did not choose citizens' happiness and satisfaction as a goal, they still considering, citizens' happiness and satisfaction. That was interesting. But, this is we need to, how we gonna use this simulation data into our study is another thing we need to really integrate it really well, and we are welcome your suggestions. Okay, the second part of the our interview was a role of society. So what society has to support our people to live a virtuous life, right? So inequality. Supporting equality, human rights issues, and huge things. And one interesting thing is some kids talked about some participants talked about having a education, not focusing on other examination hell aspect of it. so there was okay. I think. Would you like to have a more Yeah. Yeah.
The candidate piece?
Yes.
Okay.
Please. Yeah. I don't think we have a lot of time. We have 5 minutes. Sorry.
Yeah. That's okay. So 5 minutes. Okay. I'll just say a few things to give you. So for Canada now, we've got transcripts, as I said, from the highest wisdom scorers. I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the things that are striking when you look at the transcripts themselves. So, in particular, do you know any stories, say, within a religious tradition that motivates you to be virtuous? It's like, a story. This is from the atheist group. I like the story where the guy, I think it's Catholic. I'm so bad. I'm sorry. They says, it's okay. Where they cut the baby, I think Solomon. Anyway, so the point is that I'm trying to make from this story is that it's a classic story. So even from the atheist group, they're on the edge, so within Canada. It's such a well-known story that they've got the gist of it, but they're not 100% sure about the details. But the other interesting thing is that and this could be one example, participants don't fall into our neat categories. So this example, tell me a bit about yourself and your life story. This is their opening question. It's like, well, I'm 18, so I don't have that much. My mom says I'm blessed, basically, because I was born on a Sunday. And then later on, as different stuff's happening, like the movement for gay marriage and stuff, and the movement for feminism and stuff, we kind of started changing our values a bit. We don't really go to church because it's a patriarchal institution. The moment the women can be a priest, we'll go to Mass. But sometimes we'll go just because we need to feel connected. And then she says, but I also struggle with mental health, so it's made me feel a lot closer to God. And that's where my Buddhism thought kind of comes in, or ideology, because a lot of therapies and CBT and stuff is based on that. So you can see she's sort of free-ranging across all these different sort of categories. And the same thing applies even with her exemplar. She says, well, it's my neighbor. He was also a cousin. He's passed away. He was a Francophone priest. He was an amazingly cool priest. He wasn't perfect. He's I'm just human. And that's one of the reasons why he was so virtuous. He was a priest, but he didn't rely too much on the Bible. He gave really good advice. It was religious, but kind of like Buddhist at the same time. And she said, but I mean, it's all the same God at the end of the day, right? So we can see this is from the Christian group, but well, when you go to the Muslim group, you also see something not exactly the same, but somewhat similar. I have friends from a bunch of different faiths, and some are Buddhist, some Christian, etc. I interact with them, and I kind of absorb those traits. I turn them into my own. And I don't say to myself, that this person taught me this or that religion taught me that. it's just that I got this from another faith or person, and to say that doesn't belong to myself. So you see, he gave me this sense that they're pulling from different. They don't feel compelled to actually just stick to one thing. And even the personal identity ends up being complex in the sense that, our Buddhist participant was born in Colombia, moved to Dubai at the age of 2, went to Arabic school, studied the Quran till the age of 9, and then moved to Canada. But so in Dubai, it was very difficult to be Buddhist. But then in Canada, it became a central part. So they would go to Sunday school and do all these Buddhist things, different temples. And so now it's a really central part. And her, of course, her and her mother are implicated equally into the story. So my point is that that's really very much the sense of, of the data and of the way people are doing. So we have to figure out what we're going to do with this. All right. Well, end of grant expectations. Do you want to take over from here, or shall I just go ahead?
Yeah.
We can just skim over some
Right.
of
Yeah. Just this part. So I was mumbling about all this correlation stuff, which might not be really really important later part. But anyway, what we want to do is we want to first clean up the and make sure that what we are measuring in both culture are actually is a compatible, basically, right? So we're gonna do the measurement invariance test, and then we we can do like some MANOVA test and to see the mean differences between the two cultures, and we also want to do some kind of exploratory path analysis and see where the wisdom is, where wisdom is, how this wisdom play a role in all this part of it, right? Wisdom and moralities and culture and age and et cetera, right? So we want to do that. And then we also want to do the multi-group analysis because we have age differences and also religious differences and et cetera. So we want to do that. And then we want to create we have a bunch of philosophers and sociologists and politicians to do the qualitative analysis. And in the end, we want to create the book chapters and articles. This is actually it is a really really big study, and I don't know why we start doing this. So I feel really overwhelmed at times. But this will create a lot of different angles. We could make a huge study out of this one. Thank you, and your suggestions will be appreciated.
Hyeyoung, I was wondering, just seeing the qualitative data from Canada at the end, just anecdotally, I wonder if you have a sense that the young people in Korea, could they possibly be doing the same kind of postmodern bricolage, and maybe that's why some of the correlations don't make so much sense? Is that possible?
I do see that. So first of all, they don't know what morality is. They don't have a clear sense of what morality is. They don't really have a clear sense of what wisdom is either, right? So, I mean, it is really diverse. But we didn't want to give them definition. Hey, this is what. Because if you give them, they're gonna just follow us. They're gonna say whatever we want to hear, right? So at this point, it is all exploratory, right? So yeah, but I agree. It might be the case. Yeah.
Thanks, that was fabulous. It's great to see all the narrative. Great illustration of how narrative reveals how human beings think. I love that. Because from time to time we do study humans. And I'm wondering, in those illustrations, were those from people you said who scored high on wisdom scale?
So
right.
Exactly, okay. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and so we see this mixed bag, kind of self-constructed in a way, kind of non-conformist view of wisdom. And we saw in the Korean sample that cognitive wisdom, okay, which is kind of it's like on the complexity side of things on Ardell, is correlated with conformity, correct? And I'm wondering if you could
Right. Yeah.
comment on it. Yeah.
Yep. Do you want to talk about it?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Yep. Interestingly, there was in my mind all along this cognitive and conformity. So I had a really interesting experience. Like students who come to these sessions, I mean, participants who come to these sessions, they never. Some of them they don't even thinking about these things. So they are so happy after the session because they feel like this is like counseling session, right? And they said, oh, this is so great. I never thought about this one. This is really gives me something to think deeply about, right? So, as you said, like they are really in beginning they start saying this, and in the end they talk about different things, right? So about the cognitive part, I was constantly thinking like maybe they are people who are participating in this one actually trying to conform and try to give us answer what we want to hear. Because a few people, I also interviewed a few students, they said, in the end, they said, oh, I'm not sure I can give you the good answers. There's no good answers or right answer, but they have this tendency to try to conform. And they think that that's wise, right? You know what I mean? That's conforming the society. The social goal is wise, right? I also want to mention one more thing. One of my previous study I did, Korean students have a higher cognitive wisdom compared to American students. Although traditionally that actually should be opposite. Korean students, I mean, Eastern wisdom is more focusing on the reflective part and affective part, while Western wisdom is more focusing on the cognitive part, like decision making and reasoning and etc. But it was actually opposite. So like the education, like going Korean adolescent who have only one-dimensional life, going to school, back to home, school, home, and conforming their parents is the best way.
And that is wisdom.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's what that's exactly. So that's why you see this wise exemplar. They talked about a lot of parents example as a parent.
In mothers in particular, you had
Yes.
mentioned, which is an interesting thing. A more
Right.
communal form of wisdom, where in a lot of measures of integrative complexity is wisdom, or psychosocial maturity is wisdom. You've got a correlation with a lot of more agentic kinds of concerns, and so
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful presentation. Hyeyoung, thank you for putting jet lag to good use in data analysis. That was heroic. The pattern of quantitative and qualitative findings you have presented so far, based on a small subsample, and some of the reports you're making, make me think that because of the diversity of both religious and cultural identity that you're finding in the sample, a lot of your quantitative full sample findings are going to get washed out. And where the greater insights from the study may come is in constructing subgroup analyses. One example of that, I think, is the observation you made of how much Buddhist religious identity is tied into Korean national identity or cultural identity. It kind of reminded me of the state of American Protestant Christianity in the 1950s, where being American was isomorphic in some respects with being a Protestant. It may be necessary, therefore, to identify subgroups of individuals in both Korea and Canada for whom their religious identity is in some respects distinctive or can be set apart from their cultural identity. If you're going to answer the question that lies at the foundation of this, which is the extent to which religious or cultural identity ends up calling the shots. In any case, the bottom line, I think, is that this is one of those studies where, as much as all of your instincts, Hyeyoung, I think, are oriented toward doing very sophisticated quantitative analyses, it's going to be the subgroups, I think, that are going to tell you the more interesting things about your sample.
Right.
It's a great study.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, so first of all, I really enjoyed the presentation, so thank you. And also, you might have actually answered my two questions, so I apologize for my inattentiveness. So with regards to the questions on the exemplars, right, that you asked, You asked about whether the moral exemplars they identified were wise, correct? Or did you ask separately about moral exemplars and wise exemplars?
Like first, the way we did it is we were thinking this as a team. So we first asked for moral exemplars and some details about that, why they're nominated, stories about that. And then we asked, and do you think this person is wise? Just a totally open-ended question. And then if people said yes, then that's the end of that piece. But if they said no, then we'd say, well, think of someone who's wise and nominate them, say, independent. But actually, so far, I think virtually universally, people do consider their moral exemplars to be wise.
Right.
And you don't think that might be because of some flaw in the assessment, that because you asked people about moral exemplars, they felt, because I wrote about my moral exemplar, it would be odd if I said, well, my exemplar, I can think of a wise exemplar, right? But because I've written about this moral exemplar, I'm going to go with him or her. Right. And that could be especially true for the young people, right? Because for a lot of young people, the idea of their wise exemplar could be their parents. So, they may not have thought through these issues as much, right? So the easy thing would be to go with the person that they thought that picked first time around.
I think it's although they are, I told you earlier, they are going all, they are all over. But one thing they are very consistent is that they are setting up the definition of morality, definition of wisdom very early on. So I think it's a yes and no. To your question, because some people are very consistent, and they said, okay, this is a moral exemplar, but not necessarily wise exemplar, right? But some people said, go with it, right? So yes and no. So that we'll have a more result the end of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my second question is, could you just explain your well-being measure? Maybe you had some information about that, but could you just say what was in your well-being outcome measure?
Yeah, we went very quickly over. It's developed by Frisch. I think it's Michael Frisch. And it's the quality of life inventory. And so the way that inventory works, which I thought is interesting, is you start with the question like, how important is work to your quality of life? And you say, like on a scale of 0, 1, 2. And how satisfied are you with your work life these days, right? And then you go like, you 0, 1, 2. And so
-3 to +3.
-3 to +3,
Yeah.
sorry. So -3 to +3. So then what that lets you do, there's 16 things like that. So it goes from things that are personal to you, your work, your play or things like that, and then things that are much more communal, so family, community, these types of issues. And so you can actually get a sense both of what people value in their quality of life, and then how much they feel that's manifest in their own life. That's actually the way they measure quality of life, is how much are the things that are important to you manifest in your own life. Like, I could have a lot of things that don't matter to me, and too little of things that do matter to me, my quality of life will be poor. So that's the measure we have. Yeah.